All right, so here we go. Another quick video for winter preparation. This one is just going to go through the fire sprinkler riser room and let us see if we can get just a quick overview on how to shut these down, how to identify them so we know what we're looking at. If you don't feel super comfortable doing this, please reach out to someone who's done it before. This would be a great exercise to do with FaceTime. I'm available for you. If you get to a building, just let someone who's done it before get on the phone with you, walk you through it if you feel like you need some help the first time. If not, I really think that this video, and I apologize that it's not right live at a riser room, but I think these diagrams that we have can do it justice. So you're going to find the fire riser room in your meeting house. Majority of ours are on the exterior wall of our meeting house with a door that opens up to the exterior. Some of them will be inside, but it's all going to be the same. You're going to get into the riser room, and your primary goal is to find the main line coming out of the slab. Now, there are buildings that have wet systems, dry systems. Some have a combination of both. Within those wet systems, some of those are standard water, some of those are antifreeze water. So we're going to try to cover just as many of the different options as we can without getting too confusing. Ultimately, the easy part of this is we're going to find the slab that you see here, and you'll see this big 4-inch pipe or so that comes up out of the ground. And this is just a quick detail here, and we'll get into another slide and show you. But the very first component that you're going to get to, typically above this coupler, will be your main shutoff to the water supply that comes from the city. Okay? So one more time, that very first component you see on this pipe, besides little pressure valves like this, this is telling us how much pressure we're getting from the city. That first big bulky piece that you're going to find is going to be that shutoff valve. Now, the good news is that in most cases, the city requires, mandates, and specs that that valve will be labeled. And so we'll see that here in just a second. Once we find that line and that first valve, that's where we're going to shut off the water. So if you get to the meeting house and the pipes have already busted and the alarms are going off and the meeting house is filling up full of water, this is a no-brainer. This is just a turn of this valve, and I'll show you a picture on how to do that, turning that valve off so that we're no longer just spewing water into the building. If you see this tiny little piece here, and I'll get a better picture of it here in a second, this tiny little piece is an indicator on whether or not the valve is open. In this case, your valve is open because this paddle is up and down and not horizontal. So in a vertical spot, think of it like a line. Boom, there's a line, just like a ball valve. When it's horizontal to the ground, then it's shut off. Okay, so let's pop in and look at a couple of things here. Let's look at this image. This image is a lot for us to see from this image. Now, there's a bunch of different types of valves out there. We're going to see a big valves like this one where you can get two hands on, and this screw will move forward and backward as we're closing that valve. So this is going to be just like your water spigot at your house. Spin it all the way to the right to seat the valve and close it, or open it all the way to the left to retract the valve. In this case, this is retracting the valve into this case here to let the water pass through. So that would be all the way to the left. When we go back and look at this one, I know it's not, let's see, maybe this one over here. Let's see if I got lucky enough to have a picture of a small valve. So here's a picture of a small valve. So this is going to be an offset geared valve. So we're not retracting so much as we're just moving a butterfly valve inside. So you'll see a much smaller wheel. And you see now how this is horizontal. That means that this valve is closed. So no water can come up out of the ground and enter into the meeting house when this here is horizontal. Same with this, right to tighten or close, left to loosen or open. Okay. I'm going to jump back and forth between some of these valves. and show you a few different things. So just by point of review, that first valve that you see, which in this case is this one, and I showed you a smaller valve over here. This is the first item that is above the ground. That's your shutoff valve. Now remember, before we get to this point, we've already gone on and put the sucker in test. And if there's anyone in the building, notifying them, because the alarm is most likely to sound when we tamper with this device. The downside to what we're doing is that the alarm will have to be silenced at the panel and probably every 24 hours. So it can be a little bit annoying, but it's going to put a supervisory tamper alarm. As soon as we do that, because those contacts are going to close, if you look down here in this valve, this below the valve, this electrical piece, that's where that tamper alarm is going to be installed at some point in this system. And that's what's sending the signal back to the fire alarm to make the noise. All right, so identifying which two systems you have is extremely important. Let's look at this system here. We've got a black iron pipe coming out of the ground, so right here at the bottom of the picture. And that pipe comes up through the first valve, which is the main valve to shut the water off. But if you'll notice up here at the top, we see galvanized pipe. When we see galvanized pipe, that's the indication to us that we have a dry system. Now, just because we have a dry system doesn't mean that there's not the potential for a freeze, especially during a deep winter freeze. It's our PM responsibility, what sometimes doesn't happen, to get in and drain the condensation drains that are attached to the low points of this particular dry system. By getting those drained, we're going to eliminate hopefully the potential for those valves to freeze, break, let air come out, and the systems to flood the building. These are normally pretty good through our storms if they're PM'd properly and that condensation is drained out of the line. They're normally pretty good through our deep freezes until the power goes off. Once the power goes off, inside this little clapper valve, the air pressure will release, and when it releases, think of it like a deadfall on a survival show where someone's put a piece of bait underneath a stick and a rock, and when it slams shut, it smashes the poor little prey, right? That's what happens in here. The air pressure is holding back a deadfall, and the deadfall is held back with air pressure that's greater than the pressure of the water. So air pressure coming down is greater than the water pressure coming up, and the deadfall stays put and it doesn't do anything. Should the air pressure drop up here like a real fire and the sprinkler pop open and the air escapes, then this deadfall falls forward and allows water to pass from the city into this pipe and into our building. So even if you're looking at a deep, long winter freeze and a possibility of loss of power, this one here is still a good candidate for shutting the water off. This particular case, after putting the system in test, we would come here to the black valve and we would turn it to the right all the way until it seats so that the water can't get into the system. Now, with this being said, all we have to do is watch the air pressure up here, make note of it. Sometimes there's little black marks or something to indicate where its normal pressure is. And when we come back, as long as this dial is in the same spot, we should just be able to turn this valve and a little bit of water charge pop up against the back of that deadfall, and our system's good to go. Should you come back and find that this valve has lost air, that could be due to maybe some small condensation in one of the heads and it actually froze and broke. It could mean that our air compressor went out during a power outage, and maybe during startup because it had been, sitting there with no power, it tries to start up and it's cold, and so the pistons move slowly and it throws the breaker. Well, that can happen as well if our riser room where the where the air compressor is at gets real cold, those lubricants inside can get, their viscosity gets really, really thick, and the engine has a hard time turning over, and the breaker pops, and then before you know it, we've lost air pressure here. So turning off the water helps, takes care of that. You don't have to, and I would ask you not to, advise you not to release the air from this system, because once you do that, then you're going to need a certified person to come back and remove these 4 bolts and reset that deadfall trap so that it's ready to go. So we're just going to turn off this valve, make note of the air pressure, and when we return, we will turn this back on and good to go. Should you get to the building and find that this has already busted, say you get a water flow alarm, but you get there and there's no water anywhere. Well, probably what happened if you have a dry system is that there was something that caused, in this case maybe a power outage, and your air compressor was off for a good period of time, and your air pressure dropped, and the deadfall opened up. Water charged the system, but thank goodness none of the heads opened or popped, and now you just have water in this galvanized pipe. So we still need someone to come out and professionally put this back together. But what we can do to prevent, especially if we have more cold days coming, and really just having this under pressure is a bad thing, because those particular water sprinkler heads aren't really designed to stay charged for a long period of time, because they're meant to be dry. So in that case, we would spin the wheel closed, and then we would use this main drain. All of them should be labeled. Now, what's going to happen is when you do a main drain, you're going to get something like this. And so I show you this because somewhere near the riser room, like you see here, there is a small pipe that comes out, and you'll know that you're draining it properly through the right spot by turning that main drain if you see water coming out the side like I just showed you. So again, that's if we get to the building and the system's been charged, possibly because of loss of power to the air compressor, we can now turn off the valve, drain the water, and then give our fire sprinkler guys a call so they can come out and make this whole again. Okay? So we just talked about dry systems. Let's just pop over here. This has got less things in it, because you'll notice in a wet system that we do have less things in there. This will have something similar. This one's still under construction, but it's still a good look at what it's going to look like. You're going to have that pipe that comes out of the ground from the slab. You're going to have the first valve, which shuts that off. And there's going to be a lot of other nice trinkets and gadgets up near the top. And you can see this. This is a design of one of our current meeting houses. There are different types of sensors and flow switches and pressure gauges, bleed-off valves, little test ports so they can do little tests. And again, here's a main drain that goes outside. Now, the difference with this one, let's do it from this for a second so we can show you what it looks like in a real drawing. In this particular meeting house, this is wet. This is a wet system. We're going to close off the valve. It's going to be that little small red gate valve right here on the side, just like we showed earlier in the illustration. And when we do that, that's going to stop the water flow from the city into our wet fire sprinkler system. We're going to have to go to that label that we saw, main drain. Now, I get it, this is a dry system, but let's use our imagination. There will be a drain off to the side, and it should be labeled main drain. When we open that up, we're going to drain all the water out of the unit. This one's probably not a great picture because they don't have all of that installed. That was probably going to be here on the side of this cap or over here. So I'm sorry I showed you that. And we'll just stick to this diagram. You'll turn that valve off that's labeled main drain. Open that by turning to the left. Open that valve up that says main drain and continue watching from outside wherever this drains. So you may need to go outside if this is an interior fire riser. In this case, this is just right there behind the door. And stay here watching that until that becomes empty. That way you know that when there's no longer water coming out of there, that makes you feel confident that this valve is closed properly and all the water that was throughout the building has been drained from your system. That's really all you have to do, and your system's shut off. That's the nice thing about this type of wet system. Now, if we're looking at this from a fire alarm call, you got a fire alarm call that there's water flow, and you get out to the building, or maybe you send a member out to the building, and there's nothing. There's no water anywhere. Well, great news. Maybe you have a water flow that was short, so you're going to really want to pay close attention, because what happens sometimes is the heads will have a freeze that are maybe a foot or two away from the sprinkler head, and it gets frozen, and it's enough to let some water out and get your water flow to activate, but that piece of ice that's a foot or two away gets lodged down at the end and acts as a plug. So you may not see tons of water real quick. You might see some small staining. Those are going to be some telltale signs that, oh goodness, my head broke, but then it got resealed by a chunk of ice. I'm really worried about this, because if I just leave it like it is until it gets 40 degrees outside, once that sucker melts, then the hole's unplugged, right? And now your building's filling up. Those are those late ones we get where it's gone a day or two past the freeze and nothing's happened. And then all of a sudden you have water everywhere. Typically that's because there was a quick release of water, enough to sound the alarm, and then an ice plug. So if that happens, still need to drain the system. If for some reason that system wasn't already drained, so that's where we'll come into the valve, shut it off, get your paddle horizontal so you know there's no water flow from the city. Open up the valve by turning it to the left, watching it till there's no water coming out of the little spout, and then you'll know that that particular system is good to go. Okay? Now, the last one that I want to cover is, we'll use this as an image. We look up, we see that it's black, it's matching what come out of the ground. That's telling us, because it's not a galvanized pipe, it's telling us that that's a wet system. Now, hopefully, if you have a wet system that has antifreeze in it, it should be labeled with a sticker, with a bright sticker on the pipe that says antifreeze or antifreeze loop. If we have an antifreeze or antifreeze loop, it's not going to be the right thing to do to drain. The antifreeze should be tested annually during your PM to be whatever you need it to be, -30, -20. The more antifreeze to water ratio you put, the colder that your building can withstand. You need to figure out what that is with your local provider who manages your fire suppression system, and you'll be good to go. If you happen to go to a building that you're worried about, and hey, trust me, we have had buildings with antifreeze loops break. And typically it's been because they were not doing the PMs, and the water that was in there was maybe only rated for 15 degrees or 20 degrees. It wasn't enough glycol in order for it to protect itself during a deep freeze. But what you could do, if you are worried about a particular system that maybe hasn't been PM'd in a while, you can still use the same main valve to shut the water off. So now you got here horizontal to the deck, shut the water off. In the event that something happens, your city water supply will not come in and fill up your building like a swimming pool. What will probably happen is all of your glycol will empty out into your meeting house, and it'll be nice and gross. So keep that in mind. We don't want to drop ethylene glycol out into the street. It is a hazardous material. It has to be removed properly. So if yours says antifreeze loop or antifreeze anywhere on it, you are not draining it. You can shut off the water supply, but do not drain it. Okay? All right. I think that we've covered just about every different building type and every different scenario as quickly and fastly as I could. And I hope that this is useful, helpful, and hope that you get some of your buildings protected.